you first build a landscape. You build a simulation in 3D that exists even when you turn off the screen. There's this virtual environment that's pulsating and it's changing. And then other people can enter that and create within it. The screens are little doorways, they're little guiding points through the exhibition that navigate you through it. And what you see virtually sends signals to all the sounds. So the sounds is like dynamically changing as you see the virtual world changing. Berlin in the past was referred to as Berl. And Berl is an old Slavic word that literally means swamp. So I've been exploring and digging into the past landscapes, the past ecologies, but also lost songs, mythologies, and emotions around what it means to exist and be within a wetland and a swamp.
I've worked with Jakob on some past projects. He's been building up this amazing engine for years and years and years, and I've been able to be along that journey with him and learn how it works. So while there's these underpinnings that I understand how the generative audio works, this was our first project where, I'm really creating a lot of music and a lot of content. Him and I were going back and forth for so long. How do we make that into a live sort of simulation, a live entity? And that's when we met Lugh, and he was able to take all the sounds that I'm making and all the music I'm composing, put them into this other engine that he had.
They wanted to work with spatialization of the sound in the space to sort of like map the spatiality of the world and the narrative of the world into like the cavernous space that we're in right now.
The audio concept evolved from working with Jakob and his research that he did with a fellow collaborator of his, Dane. And they present me just this giant Google Doc, and I just get to go through it. And there's images, and there's all this text. There's this Triglob, this three-headed god. There's this sort of other entity, and this dual-headed snake. And so they're all kind of like wound together with this natural world. And so him and I will go back and forth, kind of putting these into different worlds and different scenes and different feelings and different emotions.
Some of the species that you see in Berl-Berl are from the Natural History Archive in Berlin. So it means you might sense and see a feather that was collected 200 years ago, but then it meets the sound of a bird that Matt has recorded in the landscape in the present. So there's a combination of multiple senses and timescales at the same time.
Maybe there's like a leaf and it goes up like this, and I'm recording very close microphones with it. A lot of like the bark that happens in this installation is me rubbing bark just quite simply in this field, and the density of the bark and how humid it is in the swamp. All of that changes, and it's different in every ecosystem. And putting that together, chopping it all up, and then I'll play them in actual like synthesizers with like Omnisphere, and like in Ableton has their like wavetable synthesis. And so you kind of get these different textures going on along with this really natural sound of all of these different samples playing together. And then what I'll do is basically just make a giant library of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sounds, and then those are passed on to the spatialization software and categorized in a way that they play in this world and they don't play in this world. They could play in this world.
We kind of had to we create like a whole set of symbols and words and kind of a language to have a way of sending lots and lots of information from the swamp world to the sound system, let's say, and using that as instigators and like factors in this like multi-dimensional composition process. If you're looking at the screens and suddenly they all kind of go underwater, which happens a couple of times during the experience, that's like one of the points where the sound system needs to know where we are, so that we found ways to send that to the system that we're working in, which is built in MaximSP, that allows us to move sounds virtually within the space, and for that movement to be translated to the speakers. So the speaker knows where the sound is, and let's say if the sound is closer to one speaker, then it'll come out of that speaker. We have various processes, some which are more focused on the screen experience itself, and some which are basically kind of created to draw people to like the entirety of the space. So then, for example, you might be going up from the downstairs to the upstairs, and then there's some sound drawing you from the little pocket beside the stairs, and you're kind of wondering what's that, and all you see is darkness, but you kind of the fact of having some water slushing or like a frog calling you from that side kind of creates a much more expansive impression of the space.
The ancient swamp comes from, the recordings that are done in the ambience. I mean, these species have been around for a very, very long time. And then we build up with these sort of orchestral elements, these sort of rhythm elements would be these birds and these frogs, and the melody comes from Arca where, this Berghain space is amazing, it's beautiful, it's giant, it's a cathedral-like entity, and she really rips through this space and takes over with the command of the melody of it. And sort of you'll hear when she enters, everything else sort of, dies down a little bit and really gives her space. Even in the generative software of the spatialization, there's a generative layer underneath of all that you have all of these audio files that all don't get called at once. They can get called randomly.
The work of Berl-Berl will be infinitely changing and morphing, so no one will actually ever see or hear the same. Every screen and every speaker all communicate and talk to each other to create kind of a holistic feeling that takes over the building.
It's interesting because I talked to a few people in the installation. They're like, so when did, the audio loops every time? It's always the same. And I was like, oh no, it's never the same. If you come through the installation multiple times, you'll start having this sense of time, this space, this compression and expansion, and all sorts of different emotions that you won't experience twice. It's really sort of letting Mother Nature guide us how she wants to be expressed in an ecosystem.
It's a virtual landscape, but it's also an organ, like a cathedral, and it's a song for wetlands.
The beauty of that is we don't know how that emotion is going to come out, and we can't bring someone through and just say, hey, this is going to be a really peaceful experience, because maybe it's a moment in here where it's a more tense moment, and then maybe we have the opposite. So the most challenging thing is the most beautiful thing, and we don't know how it'll always end up because it's a live simulation.